So at the very bottom of the screen where it says Zip Form Mobile, that's the app. You get it from the Play Store or whatever it is you iPhone folks use, right? You go in there and get it, and it has everything the Zip Form has. So once you download it, you're going to need your password, your username, and your password. And you set it up. I have mine set where it automatically logs in now, so I can jump in there. And then in here, you can do all your documents. You can do everything just like you can on your desktop. And the reason, it's an add-on for the brokerage account. So I want to make sure everybody knew that it was there. I'm going to open up one transaction to show you how it works just real quick, and then we'll change that out a little bit. Let's see. Is everybody seeing that on the screen? The phone? Okay. So I'm inside this transaction where it has that gray line across that says transaction summary. That's your drop down. And if you go there, you have your documents, your checklist, your parties, whatever, right? So that's your menu, if you will, inside the transaction. And from here, you can do just about everything else you can do on your desktop. And I just want to make sure you guys knew that it was available. There is a part of it, which we're not going to go into right quick, but there's a part where you're supposed to be able to sign electronically to make that work. You just have to have everything set up. But I can actually send. If you look at the icons, I can send it for approval. I can send it out to somebody. I can send it to a doc inbox. I can send it to an email if I want to. If I wanted to email that out, it's just like it would be on the desktop version. So you have access to all this just on your phone. Anybody have any questions there on that one? Again, that's just Zip Form Mobile, and we all, because of our brokerage account, we have that available to us. And there's some other things. I've been trying to go through some of the things that Zip Form has. Like I've said before, since Lone Wolf took it over, they've changed a lot of stuff, and they keep changing it. So there's a couple other little things in there that we have. One of them is the MLS Connect. We have that in Gmar, right? And then we also have Offer Place. And Offer Place is where we actually can set it up so that we get our offers all in one area. But we'll go through that in a separate setting so we can cover it. All right, so then I'm going to share the screen with you, and we're going to go into another part of this. By the way, just as a reminder, everything we have, every form we have, every form that we use with consumers, with the exception of notices where they don't initial or they don't do anything with, we just provide it to them. Everything we have basically requires some kind of a date on it. And it sure makes it a whole lot better if we use the date, because if there's ever a problem, it's going to come back to when did this happen? And most of us on here, with everything you do, there's absolutely, at least in my mind, a very slim chance you're going to remember exactly when something happened, unless you have dates on the forms. And I tell you that because as I was going through mission documents this morning, there were several forms in there that did not have dates on them in one transaction. So when did they do the information about brokerage services? No date. When did they do the buyer rep? When did they have the buyer rep? They had no dates, right? Seller's disclosure. The contract says that they're going to get it within a certain amount of time, right? They don't have it, they're going to get it. So they had the seller's disclosure and it was signed by the buyer. There's no dates on it. So those are the kind of things that we want to make sure that we stay aware of, so that we make sure the dates are in there. Yadi, I'm going to make you co-host so you can run that if you would, please. Thank you. Actually, I have a lot more here than what I was anticipating. That's what we're talking about. I know a lot of people have power out and other issues going on. All right, so also to kick us off this morning, I want to share with you, I'm going to share the screen with you, share some slides with you and some other a little tidbits. The idea basically is to cover information that you could possibly use, of course, right? Want to do that. And let me widen this up. Also, make sure we're up to date with other things that may be going on in this business. Like, for example, some of you may have read the email or seen the email that came out where RPR is changing. February the 24th, RPR is changing. I'm trying to work on some things with that as well to keep us up to date with what's happening with it. What you see on the screen right now, everybody have that about CE? Everybody see that on the screen? That's today, right? Yeah, February the 16th at 10 o'clock. And if I'm gonna do that here. This. All right, so I just threw the link in the chat if anybody wants to go to that. Just by Trex running it, there's going to be all kinds of people there. This is something they started a few years ago where if you attend the meeting, so again, today would have been the beginning of the a winter meeting for Texas Realtors. And Trex started this thing that if we would go over there and attend the meeting, we get educational credit, hoping that some of the people that went there that didn't have too much going on would go over and attend the meeting. It says you can get up to 4 hours just by attending the meeting. The link for it to attend is, I just put it in chat if anybody wants to do that. It starts at 4 o'clock. When you click on the link, it'll open up and you'll be able to see on the right-hand side, they have their agenda. So you'll actually see some of the things they're going over. It's interesting sometimes to watch and listen to some of what they cover because they cover disciplinary action, they cover rule changes, they cover contract changes, and you'll see the individuals that are on there, the Trex commissioners, agreeing and not agreeing on the way things should be done, which is, for me at least, I find that interesting because you think that we all have the same focus. Postponed until February 17th. The meeting is in okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But you have the link. In the chat, it says that and I put in there that it's been postponed till tomorrow, which is probably a good deal. Because today there's a lot of people without power. That's what we were discussing this morning. So anyway, so you know it's there, all right? So we can work with that. Thanks for posting that in there, man. Appreciate that. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. One of the things I also want you to know this morning as we get started, this just for a few minutes is going to be maybe a tad bit negative, but please don't take it that way. It's just a reminder. If you take a look at the screen, the one that's on there right now, this is an individual that failed to let the buyer know that they needed to have a title policy. So this comes from the most recent Trex advisor, right? Comes from the most recent Trex advisor. We are supposed to let the buyer know that they need to have a title policy. That's part of our job, right? It's in the 1 to 4 family contract. It says they should. But what happened in this case, and I have this in here, and I'll probably throw these slides and a recording of this at least in the Facebook groups this afternoon. But this was that case right here. And so this was in 2017. For those of you that's new, this is why it's so important we make sure that we have all of our documents in one place so that you don't have to think about it 2 or 3 years later. But here in this case, this is in 2017. The buyer was being represented by an agent, right? They put an offer in, it gets accepted, they're off and running, everything's good. And then the buyer and the seller just happen to meet. So they discuss what's going on. The seller tells the buyer, you don't need a title policy. The seller tells the buyer, you don't need a title policy. And the buyer's agent doesn't do anything with that other than to write up an amendment, because obviously the buyer tells the agent writes up an amendment and gives it, has the buyer sign it, has the seller sign it, they send it to the title company on the same day that they're closing, saying there's not going to be any title policy. And then 2 years later, 2019, he bought this in 2017, 2019, he gets ready to refinance and he's made aware that there's 3 liens on the property for $1,200. And he can't refinance even without paying off those liens. So he files a complaint with Trek against the agent that was representing him. We need to make sure that just because a buyer says this is what somebody said or this is what they did, remember we've talked about that. It's our client. Our job is to take care of them. And if there's any doubt, ask somebody. Number one. Number two, there's also a form that says the buyer needs to have a title policy. If we're using anything other than the TREC forms, Texas Realtor forms, right? Because contracts are promulgated. Texas Realtors just puts their little signature on. If we're not using that promulgated form, then we need to use that addenda that says they're aware they need to get that done. Right. So here's another one where an individual put a property in MLS, and I just highlighted the bullets in number 4 right there. In MLS, he put in that there was an area pool, like a community pool, right? But come to find out, there's not one. And the buyer liked the idea of having a community pool. They thought that would add value to the property, et cetera, right? And I can actually see an agent saying, yeah, it would. But they found out that it didn't. The agent says, oops, my bad. And so the buyer decides, and again, this was 2017. In 2019, they actually took some action on it. And between 2017 and 2019, the individual had listed several other properties in that area and put the same thing, that it had an area pool. Not being really aware of what it did have and didn't have. Anyway, so this complaint was created, and this is one of the most recent ones. The TREC advisor came out this week. That's where I pulled these from. I was going through it and I was like, you got to be kidding. And on this one, it's not too bad. He was only fined $1,000. And they told him he had to take a 30-hour marketing course with Mac McFarland. So that'll fix that. And then here's another one for you real quick. And again, like I said, I'm just trying to throw some of these out there for you just to hit home the fact of some of the things that I see or hear and make sure that we're all okay and we're doing the right thing. Number 2 right here, the individual said they filled out a contract saying they represented the buyer and the seller. That's that ratification page where we put, if we're representing both parties within the company, we put everything on the right-hand side, right? And I was just this morning going through contracts, and you have one agent working with 2 individuals, buyer and the seller. Please remember that if you're working with both sides and you have it checked as intermediary, we need a listing agreement and a buyer rep agreement, because you should have been representing the buyer beforehand, right? And if we don't have that, then you don't really have intermediary. You have sub-agency where you're representing the seller and you're working for the seller and with the buyer in most cases. But anyway, on this one, they said they were an intermediary and that they had made a mistake. They really wasn't representing the buyer, but the buyer was under the impression that they were being represented. And all of us know that TREC's primary purpose is to protect consumers, right? So that's where that would go to. Any questions there? Anybody?
Me, I'm sorry. Can you please repeat that? Like when you're working with both sides?
Yeah, if you're working with both sides, that usually happens because you have a listing, right? You have a listing and a buyer calls you and wants to see the property. They don't like that property. They want to go out and look at another property. Or you've already done a buyer rep with them and they're looking at property and you get a new listing. And you know that new listing might fit their needs. So you bring them together. So in that case, you have a buyer rep agreement and a listing agreement in either one of those situations. And if you have that, then you can have intermediary where you're working with both sides, but you're not giving any advice or opinions, because that's intermediary without appointments. Intermediary without appointments, no advice, no opinions. If Claudia, if you had the seller and I had the buyer, then we'd have intermediary and we could both, because Norma would be the intermediary, right? And we both give advice and opinions to our clients, to the buyer or the seller. But if you're working with both sides, you can only be an intermediary if you have a buyer rep and a listing agreement in that transaction. Like I said, that 3 years ago when I first started this, that seemed to be a pretty common issue, but today it's not. Across the board, most of us have fixed that. And that's one of the things, like on this one, that's one of the problems that buyers think. When you give a buyer your opinion about something, your opinion, they think they're being represented. That's why there's no advice, no opinions, unless there's representation. And it works really well that way. Any questions? Anything else? That makes sense, Claudia?
Yes, thank you.
So, and how the heck do you get power? You got power in Los Fresnos?
Yes, and actually, I don't know if it is because of the solar panels or because I'm lucky. I don't know. But this area is powerful.
Awesome, good. Because I know the island was having tremendous problems. Here's
Laguna Vista as well. They don't have power.
yes, yeah, and because they didn't have power, the water was shutting off because they couldn't fill up the tank, and
Yeah, lower pressure.
yeah, yeah. Addendum regarding residential leases. This is one of the new addendums. This should come out in the first part of April. Should be available first part of April, but because we're talking about listing addenda, I want to throw this one out because this is something we should be having a conversation today about with sellers. Even though we don't have the form, we should be having a conversation. On this form, it addresses the seller may not execute any new residential leases. This is about leasing the property. So if it's a duplex, triplex, fourplex, that's what we're talking about. This is addendum regarding residential leases. And in this case, if we go to contract with this form, they're not going to be able to lease out any new property. Let's say they have a fourplex and they have 3 of them filled, but not the 4th one. They can't lease out that 4th one without getting the buyer's permission. That's what the very beginning part says. Then you have the A there is where that the leases are going to be terminated, but you can't terminate a lease without doing it properly, right? And that's why they have the notice in there as well. Will not amend or terminate any existing leases. This paragraph does not amend or terminate any leases. So we want to look at that aspect of it. We also have delivery of residential leases. And it says, I highlighted check one box because we only need to check one box. And we usually check the right boxes, or at least when it says check a box, we'll check a box. But occasionally we have a tendency to want to check all the boxes, which means we didn't read that one little bit right there. The number 2 is one that's actually in the contract right now. It's in the 1 to 4 family contract. The buyer shall deliver to the tenant a written statement saying they bought the property and that they have the security deposit. That's in our 1 to 4 family contract. And then and how much that security deposit is, right? And then number 4, the seller is going to notify the buyer if they find out that any of the B3, anything in B3 is untrue. And within 7 days after providing the notice to the buyer, then the buyer has some options on what they can do, et cetera. So we have to read through it. This comes out 1 April. It's supposed to be in effect on 1 April. So we should see those. I don't think we'll see them before 1 April. If we do, it'll be just right before. I was checking this morning. They're still not, the new forms are not available. The new contracts are not available yet. They should be available after February. So here within the next couple of weeks, we should have those available to work from. This is the addendum regarding fixture leases. And again, this is something, again, we should be talking to the sellers about today, not messing with it. What do they have that is leased that might be considered a fixture? And we've had that conversation before. The solar panels, the propane tanks, water softeners, security systems. What is it? And on this addendum, the buyer is going to assume and the seller is going to assign. So we have to make sure, first off, that their system will allow them to do that. right? And the buyer is going to pay. Buyer shall pay, right? That's what it says in that second sentence that I have highlighted there. The first so many dollars out of it, right? So we have that. And then the seller shall pay the remainder. It doesn't, we don't have a choice. It shall pay, right? That's the way the attorneys look at it. That's when Trex attorneys talk about it. They say shall means you will. Two, prior to closing, the seller will or will not remove the fixture and repair any damage to the property. So again, we have to have that conversation to make this work right. And if we're not having it, that just opens us up for those liability issues that are already there. Because some of this is just should be conversations we're having already, and agents haven't. I'm not saying it's us, but agents haven't had, and the state has issues with some of this stuff because agents haven't been doing that. So this is formed just specifically for that. Then the buyer has received a copy of all the fixtures, the warranties and etc., or the buyer has not received and may terminate actually. And this is another one that's been updated. This one should be available after February. And it's just a minor change, but it pertains to the Property Owners Association, which means it's for a subdivision. So I just wanted to throw those in there. Everybody good? All right, for those of you that don't have your cameras on, those of you who don't have your cameras on, I know most of you are probably still listening, but we're gonna mess around here just a little bit. I have some questions I'm gonna throw out. I'm gonna throw them out on the slide. You can answer them. Almost every one of them is A, B, and C, right? So A, B, or C would be an answer. So it's a question based on a situation, and you answer it. And what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to keep track of who answers the most questions correctly. And we'll see how we go through this. There's only about 9 of them, but it will give us a chance to answer the questions. You evaluate the question or the situation, answer it. Just throw your answer in the chat, and I'll take it from there. So the very first one is this one. Seller wants to sell a condo. Besides the exclusive right to sell listing agreement, which addenda would be required to specifically list this property? Right. All right, so the first 3 to answer was Delith, Gabino, and Gina. The first 3 to answer. Alex, A is correct, by the way. Let me just get this first bunch down here. So on these, as we go through them, one of the reasons why I'm trying to do it this way is as I was looking at this, trying to put it together, I was thinking about myself sitting at that table with the buyer, with the seller, and then making a comment about what they had going on, or asking fact-finding questions and finding things out from them, and then having to react to it. And when we're talking about this one, now the rest of them will go a little faster because I just need to get everybody's name down there. So this is what we're talking about. It's the condominium addendum to listing. And this one, This one actually allows us. This one actually allows us to actually put it with our exclusive right to sell. You put it with the exclusive right to sell. And I highlighted some key things. If they're wanting to list a condo, this is one we want to put in there, right? So the exclusive right to sell is amended for this. And then on D, where it says it's a property code, Texas property code requires the seller of a unit to deliver the documents. It's not Trek, it's not us, it's Texas property code, right? So when they say, well, why do I need to do it? Or I don't have time to do it, or whatever, it's part of home ownership. It's part of real estate. And then not earlier than 3 months before the date it is delivered to the buyer, right? So not when we give it to the buyer, it can't be more than 3 months old. The buyer may be entitled to cancel the contract before the 6th day. So if you look at that little section, and what I'm talking about right there on this one, when we're looking at it, so we're talking about the resale certificate with all required attachments to the buyer to the buyer before the buyer executes the contract. Before they execute the contract, the buyer may be entitled to cancel the contract before the 6th day after they receive the documents. That's on number one. So it's on number one, they're supposed to get these documents beforehand, which means we, as listing agents, need to make sure that we have them when we take the listing. Or two, not later than this date, the seller shall obtain and deliver the condominium documents and the resale certificate. So we just need to decide what we're going to do and how we're going to do it to make that work. Everybody good there? All right, so here's the next one. Whoops. No, it's not. The wrong way. There you go. How about this one? Anybody else putting an answer in there? If not, we're going to hit clear. All right, so yeah, the answer is C. Answer is C. Named exclusions. Named exclusions. And when we look at that, so again, in this situation, the seller has a friend that wants to buy the property, but they don't want to have to pay anything. And as a listing agent, I get things like that. Well, I've talked to my neighbor, or my neighbor's cousin is moving back in the area. They may be interested in buying it. Can we work something out? That would be an exclusion, right? And that's one reason why I want to include this one, is because those situations do come up on occasion, and we need to know which form that is. So on this one, again, when we look at it, it's real simple. It gives us the information right here at the beginning. So the owner has to provide us with this information not later than this date or this many days, right? After the listing begins. So we give them some time to get that together. And we need the information. We need the buyer's name, contact information, all that good stuff, right? Not for us, but so we have their information. Owner's not obligated to pay any fees to the broker under paragraph 5A of the listing agreement. If the sale closes or leases, but the owner will pay broker at the time of the sale a fee equal to, and there's been times where I've done this, and I put zero in it. I don't have a problem with that. If that person wants to buy it and you guys want to handle it, I'm out of here. You guys can do it on your own. Like I've said in the past, I've always found that to be extremely, it's worked for me. It's been extremely successful by just backing off, let them, because they'll come back and they'll go, no, what, we want you to do it. Okay, well, I can't do it. My broker requires me to have something in there, right? So, and that at that point, that's when I talk about what we're actually going to do. But on this one, we also have on number 2 here, if the owner, right, if the owner enters into a contract after the time specified, this addendum will not apply. So if we enter into a contract after the time that was given, not, you know, for the first part of this, then it doesn't count, right? And then if that exclusion actually buys through another realtor, they get another realtor to help them purchase the property, then all bets are off. And it specifically says that, but we have to communicate that. We have to let them know. Otherwise, they're not gonna do that. All right, any questions on that one? Everybody good? Cool. All right, let's see what we have. How about this one? All right. I'm gonna put clear in here unless there's somebody else trying to put something in. The answer on this one is B. Amendment to the listing. Amendment to the listing. They want to take the property off the market for about a month due to personal reasons. And this is one that we just, I don't remember who it was, but one of the agents had called and say, hey, here's what my situation is, what do I need to do? And this is the form for that. And this is what it looks like. And this is one of the reasons why I use it. If you look at this specific form, when we look at it, the owner instructs the broker to cease marketing. That means you can go into MLS, you can do a temporary withdrawal, right? And to resume marketing on whatever date, right? Or however you have it set up there. But we can go into MLS, we can temporarily withdraw it, take it off the market, let's say 30 days, and then we put it back on the market. We have not, and that's the reason I highlighted not, we have not terminated the contract. We have not terminated the listing agreement. It's a off the market property. It's going to go back on. And this is one that you may see like during the holidays, right? Where people say, hey, I don't want anybody to show my property for the next 2 weeks because we have family coming in or something like that. And these are the things we can work with. These are some of the tools. Please keep in mind though, that we also have clear cooperation. So if the property has a sign in the yard, it has to be an MLS. So temporarily withdrawn is not off the market, right? It means it's just temporarily withdrawn. It's going to be available in the future. Now, as I was putting this together, one of the things I was trying to think about based on what's happened over the last couple of years with NAR and Texas Realtors, I would probably today put a comment in agent remarks. Properties coming off the market temporarily on February the 15th until February the 25th, or until March 25th due to personal reasons. So you put the notice out to everybody, because there's agents out there that actually prospect withdrawn, just like they do expired. And if it's temporarily withdrawn, that is not open to prospecting, should not be open to prospecting. And if we put a comment in there, that even makes it even, in my opinion, a little more serious, because we've even told them, don't be prospecting this property, right? That it's not off the market, it's just temporarily, and it's for personal reasons. So, and we do not have to disclose what that personal reason is, but that should work. Very good. All right, one more real quick. The seller tells you they are a part of an owners association. Which form do you need? All right. All right, so the answer there is B. Answer is B. And on this, when we look at it, this is the request for information from the Owners Association. And most of you probably used this at one time or another. But what I wanted to also do is touch base on a couple little things that apply to it. One is, this is the general one. This is like a cover page. So when we talk about an owners association, we have two. We have a property owners association, which is a subdivision owners association, right? Number two is a homeowners association, which is condos, HOA and POA. So we have two of them that we're working with. And when we're working with them, this is the cover sheet. And it basically, again, real simple, tells us that I'm requesting information on the subdivision or on the condominiums. Now, for the condominiums, the only one that's supposed to get this is the seller. And I don't know if that actually is the way it actually is practiced at the island, for example. I've heard agents get that information themselves. But the basic thing is, it's supposed to be, if it's a condo, it comes only to the seller. And then it's going to be delivered to the broker or the owner. So maybe it's the seller getting it and having it delivered to the owner. But again, this one is a property code requirement, not Trek, not Texas Realtors, not Remax or us, and not later than the 10th business day after they receive the request. They're supposed to provide it. They being the Owners Association. And then I also highlighted the enclosure down here, because on this one, again, to me, in my mind, it's like the cover sheet. I'm going to use it as a cover sheet for the 1921 or the 1923, which is the actual resale certificate request, right? Has all the information on it that they need to fill out. Any questions on that one? Anybody?
I have a quick question on it.
Sure.
How do we know? I've always thought about that. How do we know how much to put on there? Like enclosed is, it has a dollar amount on there. How do we handle that?
Unless somebody else can jump in with that. For myself, it's always been the owners have always been able to tell me, or they can give me the contact at the home, like with the repos. I'd have to get the contact for the Owners Association and contact them, which sometimes was not that easy because they were in Dallas or one of the large companies. Anybody else have anything on that? as far as trying to discover the dollar amount?
I've always put 0 on there and let the title company handle it. Um, so they get all that information and then they tell either the seller or the buyer, depending on the contract,
Right.
how much they need.
So within the contract, and I know of others that have done that. Others that I'm close to have done that. The leaving it up to the title company, but the contract says if they don't have it, they're going to get it and all that good stuff. And a lot of this stuff, a lot of these forms, if we don't have this information, the buyer has a way out, and we want to make sure that we try to eliminate that as best we can. And that's why, as a listing agent, I want to be proactive on this. I want to get that as fast as I can, so that I have it to upload into MLS. Even this, so like this form, most of us upload seller's disclosure. Most of us would upload lead-based paint. In my opinion, this, the survey, any other document's going to help, that's going to help a buyer's agent, would be a document that I want uploaded into MLS. And that's the direction that I think we're going to see the board going with MLS, where we can upload every document you could possibly imagine that you need as a buyer on this specific property to make things work. So we want to try to get it. If it's not, if you know where it goes, you can, like I said, I call them and I would ask, and sometimes sometimes on the repos, like I said, it was harder. I have to go to the website. I might have to go through 4 or 5 different people, things like that, to try to get hold of them. Or where they said it was not, the association was no longer valid. If you get one of those where the owner says we no longer pay dues, we no longer do this, there is a possibility that that's true. But I would ask a title rep to check that for me before I take that and run with it. Because I've been told that in Brownsville. In fact, they said that it was a foreclosure. The neighbors told me it was an optional homeowners association or property owners association. But when we got ready to close, the bank had to pay $600 in back property owners association dues, back dues, about $600 that we had not accounted for, or made the bank aware of. So, because they were collecting dues, it's just nobody was paying the darn things. Anybody have anything else on it? All right, here's another one for you real quick. Seller states that they have a septic system. Which form do you need? Septic system. So, all right. Okay. You're absolutely right. And it is a, on this one, when we look at this is the first page, right? And if it's a septic system, the whole top of it, that you can focus on that. Where's it located? Do they know how old it is? All that information, right? When's the last time they were pumped? Do they have any warranty information? All that stuff, right? But there's also a second page that goes with it. And that covers how many bedrooms, square feet, and et cetera, and how many tanks. So if you've not dealt with that before, please keep in mind that based on the size of the house and the bedrooms and baths will depend on how many septic tanks or what size of tanks they need. And if it's an older home, on the resale, that may not be grandfathered. It may be an issue. Now, I sold one in Los Fresnos that was like that, where they did not have the right size tank for the size of home at the time we were selling it. And the problem was it was a relocation and we didn't know about it until the end. And it stopped everything until a new tank was put in, which the sellers had no choice. To sell the property, they're gonna have to put a new tank in. They only had a 500, they needed 1,000, I think it was something like that. However, the other part of this, where would I see a request for this at? Where does it say that this might be attached? Anybody?
What was the question again, Mac?
So where would I see a request for this information? Information about sewer facility, on-site sewer facility. Where would I see where that needs to be attached to something or?
To the actual
Hey.
contract,
Page 7 on the contract?
yeah.
Oh,
Oh, seller's disclosure, yep.
yep. Seller's disclosure. That's it. Boom. Shakalaka. Good. I love that. Yes, seller's disclosure actually says if you have a septic, do you have a septic tank? Yes, attach this form. And that's another one of those areas where we need to read once in a while to make sure that we have everything the way it's supposed to be done. Cool. Thank you very much. And I have just a few more here. You have a listing with the multiple offers coming in. Seller tells you to tell everyone to make it their highest and best, and that he will make a decision at 6 p.m. tonight. Which form could I use? Right. Yep. Answer is B. Let's take a look at that real quick. So this is the seller's authorization to release. And on here, the seller authorizes us to inform prospective buyers or other brokers of this information and advertise, but of this information. So if you get that, use this form so you have documentation from the seller that this is what they said to do. And that way, if there's ever a doubt about it, you're covered, the brokerages is covered. That right now is one of the biggest complaints we have where, not within the company, I'm just talking about in the business. Because everybody's talking about how hot the market is and we're getting all these offers but yet you still have some people saying, I'm not even sure they presented my offer. I'm not even sure whether there are multiple offers. Are they just telling me this? Right? And if that was ever called into question, you want to have something in writing. So I would have one of these filled out. As soon as it looks like you're getting multiple offers, I would send this over to the seller with that my recommendation. And I use that example because that's exactly what I used to tell the sellers. Please let me tell everybody that you'll take the highest and best and that we're going to look at everything at 6 o'clock tonight. If their offer's not in at 6 o'clock tonight, it's too late. Now, in reality, does that mean we wouldn't look at your offer? Sure, we will, but we're going to look at these offers and make a decision at 6. If yours comes in at 8 o'clock tonight, we'll look at it. And if it's better than the others, we may take it as a backup. But we're going to make a decision based on these that we have at 6 o'clock. Does that make sense? And by having that in writing, if there's anybody ever questions your integrity, besides punching them in the face, at least we have something to back it up in the writing side, right? And should be questioning nobody's integrity, but that happens. All right, so here's another one. After you ask the seller, do they have flood insurance, and they state yes, but they've never used it, which form would you need? Yes, the answer is A, information about special flood hazard areas. That's, that form itself, always, it's Texas Realtors Form 1414, right? And I asked this question because if we're just talking to the seller, we might ask them, do they have flood insurance? Right? Because the only other way we would know is if they filled out the seller's disclosure notice and they marked yes on it. And if they fill out the seller's disclosure notice and mark yes, then we need to get that. But if I ask them that question, I can go ahead and provide them the form before they fill this out. Does that make sense? So for me, it'd be one of the questions I want to ask, especially with things like they are. There's 5 times in the seller's disclosure notice where the 1414 is supposed to be attached. If yes, attach. So when I upload the seller's disclosure notice, if it's marked yes on number 1 right there on the present flood insurance coverage, yes, right? If it's marked yes, I'm going to upload the seller's disclosure notice and the 1414 into the MLS. Pretty good? Cool. Let's do another one real quick. Seller tells you that they will need at least a week after closing to move everything. Which form do you need? Cool. Yep. Yes. All right. Yes, the seller's temporary residential lease, which was B. If the seller, when I take the listing, when you take the listing, do you ask them how much time they're going to need? And if you're not doing that, you might want to just throw that out. I've mentioned it before. My technique, not that it's good or bad, probably more bad, might not work for everybody, but my technique was real simple. We're putting your house on the market. This is what we're going to do. It's going to go into MLS tonight. Tomorrow, other agents going to be looking at it. We may get an offer. If we get an offer that's acceptable, are you ready to move? And a lot of times their first response would be something like, do you really think we will? No, I don't. But if we did, how much time are you going to need to get everything together? And that was my way of trying to get it into the conversation. Always talk about getting an offer in real quick. You use whatever you use, but ask that question so that you don't come down to 2 or 3 days before closing and find out they're not moving. That was probably in this business, one of my worst experiences was in Brownsville. The agent had never asked any questions. I was managing an office down there. We had the listing and the in a previous company, and the listing agent never had the conversation with the seller, never, right? And her claim was nobody told her if she sold the property she had to move. Really? And it took the buyer going to court and getting the eviction to get her out of the property. And I can't tell you how stressful that is. Cannot. But that happens, and it happens because of a lack of communication, in my opinion, based on the listing side. If we're going to use this, what's one of the other things we may want to cover with the seller? If we're going to use this form, seller's temporary residential lease. What's one of the other things we want to make sure we touch base on? Anybody? So the seller's going to be sticking around in the house after they sell the property. Any ideas? How about insurance? If the seller's going to be sticking around in the house after they sell the property, they are now a tenant. So the homeowner's insurance they have is not going to cover them. In addition to that, that may have been terminated The buyer's homeowner's insurance may take over, right? But the seller, the former owner, is now a tenant. They're gonna need renter's insurance for that week or 2 weeks, whatever it is. And we need to make sure that we have that conversation with the buyer's agent, because the buyer's agent needs to let their insurance company know that they're actually renting it for a week or 2 weeks, because that's going to change their insurance as well. And if they don't, they may be up a creek also. So we need to educate the other side, make sure that that insurance thing is covered, so we don't have any issues there. Questions, comments? Yeah. Last one. Seller tells you that they want to sell, but now list the property with an agent. Which form can you use to protect you in the brokerage? And that's this form. That was C. That's this form. And the items that I have highlighted on here, once again, are items that we want to make sure that we have completed, right? We want to make sure that we have the price. Who are we registering with them, right? Who's the buyer that we're working with? The agreement and the end date. Everything we do in this business must have an end date. Every one of our contracts, every one of our agreements must have a end date on it, according to Trek. And then this actually has 3 pages, and this is only the first one, but please take a look at it. If you have any questions, make sure you ask somebody, so we make sure it's filled out correctly and we don't have any problems with it. There's some in the company that have used this several times, so that should not be a problem if you have any questions, to be able to get some help with it. Agreement between broker and owner. Between broker and owner. All right. Any questions there? All right. Well, so when I was doing this, obviously I had no idea what to expect. You guys did really well. If I was to go back through and look at the numbers and look how things went, the person with the most correct answers looks like it was Brian. The most correct answers, which is a good deal. I'll go through this, make sure we have it, and I will put something in the mail to the top 3, which right now that looks like that's probably Brian. Let's see. Brian, Yannette, and Gabino. Looks like that's the top 3. But I'll go through and check it and make sure. We'll make sure that we're good to go. Anybody have any questions about anything?
I have a question, but it's not relating to the questions that were asked.
Okay.
But it's about a lease. If there was a commercial property that were to be sold and it has tenants, would it be how would it be terminated? Would it be either the buyer or the seller could terminate it, or would it be automatically terminated?
It's a commercial lease.
Yes, like a office, you could say.
Okay. And the tenant's wanting to terminate it, or
Oh no, this is just a question because I was looking over some little materials and I saw that question.
okay.
I was a little confused, and it was just if a commercial property like an office had specific tenants or whatever it may be, once the property or once the prospective buyer buys that commercial property, the
Yeah.
lease would what would happen to the lease? as
Right,
far as
commer-
it being terminated.
Commercial properties are a whole lot different than what they are on residential. I would have to go back and see what it actually says to be able to answer that myself. Generally speaking, if you have a lease, that's a contract and it's gonna have to be fulfilled. Generally,
It's like personal property. The lease.
the lease is personal property.
That's something I would use, or for me, like just saying that once you sell something, you still have that like paper that you can consider personal property.
I'm lost, Daniel. We'll maybe you and I can connect and we'll talk about that. I'll have to look up what you're talking about.
Okay.
Because commercial is completely different than residential. Residential, that's why we have that lease addendum as well now, because on residential, if somebody has a signed lease, if they have a signed lease and it's a valid lease, you have to abide by that lease. Unless there's something else worked out. And it was the same way with foreclosures. You can't foreclose on somebody. You cannot foreclose on somebody who has a lease. So like if I was renting a property and you're the owner and you stop making payments, but I have a valid lease with you, the bank can foreclose on you, but they can't kick me out because I had a valid lease. They have to let me do that. I think there's a 90-day window they can give you or something like that, but they can't just kick you out like that. That's one of the things we used to do. We'd offer them what was called cash for keys. Give me the keys and I'll give you, a $1,500 check to be out in 2 weeks and terminate, but we couldn't just kick them out. So, but commercial is completely different because on residential, if somebody has a lease and they don't pay the rent, I can't go over and just change the locks or put a lock cover over the doorknob. I can't do that on residential. There's a procedure you have to go through. On commercial, you don't pay your rent, I can chain those doors closed in a heartbeat. It's a whole different ballgame. So I'd have to look up exactly what you're talking about, but text me or something later on and let's try to do that. We'll get that taken care of.
Yeah, it sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else have anything? All right, for those of you that made it today, I appreciate it. You guys stay safe, stay warm. I think it's gonna be cold for a few more days, but it'll be okay. Be all right. If you guys need anything, just give me a yell. All right?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks.